Charlie Schroeder.
Hello, my name is Charlie Schroeder, and today I'll be presenting my thesis on how we do not reason in search of truth. We reason to support our intuitions. We think of humanity as a people who are ruled by reason. Whenever we think about the decisions we have made, we think that those decisions were made through careful consideration and reasoning. We believe our minds are rooted in reason. Whenever someone talks about their political ideologies, they give reasons why they support the policies they support. Whenever someone's presented with a moral dilemma, they give reasons on why what they would do is right. In actuality, reasoning is not in control of the human mind. Reasoning is subservient to our intuitions. For political and moral arguments, core moral foundations determine what you believe before any reasoning can even happen. Whenever people first hear this, their first reaction is to disagree. It feels like reasoning is in control of our minds. That is the trick of the unconscious mind. It is impossible to tell what is going on behind the scenes. If you look at the tables in the Shepherd tables illusion, the two tables look completely different in size and shape. One looks long and narrow, and the other looks short and wide. However, the two tables have the exact same dimensions. They are completely identical. Even after knowing this fact, our brain still tells us that they are different sizes. There's more to our mind than what we can consciously feel. It may feel like reasoning is in control of our minds, but there is more going on behind the scenes. In the novel The Great Gatsby, written by F. Scott Fitzgerald, Jay Gatsby falls in love with a woman named Daisy. However, in the midst of their relationship, World War I started. Gatsby was sent off to war, and it was unclear if they were ever going to see each other again. While the war was still going, Daisy's family urged her to marry a man named Tom Buchanan, whom she married before the war was over. Once Gatsby got back from the war, he dedicated his life to winning Daisy back. Throughout his life, he hosted extravagant parties, acquired massive amounts of wealth, and bought a house across the water from Daisy just to be in a room with her again. It got to the point where the thought of Daisy had become like a myth to him. It got to the point where his actions and desire for Daisy seemed to defy reason. While you may think that, as time went on, the thought of Daisy had clouded his reasoning, reasoning was not the source of his actions from the start. From the start, he was using reasoning to justify the actions he was already going to do. Reasoning was not the source of his plan to win Daisy. His intuitions were. It only seemed as if he was using reasoning because you could rationally see how he made the decisions he made. However, the illusion broke once he could not rationally justify his actions anymore. You may think that reasoning is in control of your mind. However, Gatsby is not an outlier in human behavior. We are all like Gatsby. Certain terms must be defined in order to fully understand the arguments being presented. The intuitions being discussed are primarily moral intuitions, which are the automatic and almost instantaneous feeling that arises after hearing a moral situation. Other intuitions, like the inclination whether or not to like someone, still generally apply to the arguments, but the points are made clearest in the context of moral intuitions. Reasoning, on the other hand, is the conscious thought put into a situation. In any situation, our intuitions come before our reasoning. Outliers to any rule always exist, and that truth is no different in this psychological trend. This is evident through the fact that sometimes people change their minds before changing their intuitions. However, what is being said still holds true in the vast majority of situations. While you may think that reasoning is in control of your minds, we do not reason in search of truth. We reason to support our intuitions. Jonathan Haidt, social psychologist at New York University's Stern School of Business and author of The Righteous Mind, illustrates how reasoning is subservient to passions. To show this, consider a man who, upset with the injustices in the United States, cuts up and burns the American flag. After hearing this, you may or may not have had an instantaneous feeling of disgust. That instantaneous feeling is your moral intuition. Any reasoning that you do to say whether or not the man was justified will inevitably support that initial feeling. While this is an extreme example, these types of judgments happen all the time in our minds. Consider another hypothetical. A man's dog was run over by a car. He had heard dog meat was delicious, so he cut up the dog's body and cooked it and ate it for dinner. Nobody saw him do this. After hearing this, you almost definitely had a flash of disgust. However, if I ask you why what the man did was wrong, how would you respond? 69% of Americans agree that this action was morally wrong. Why is that? Nobody saw him do this, and the dog was already dead when he decided to eat it. You may say that the man was scarred in doing such an action, but it was his decision to do the action in the first place. Your mind tries to invent victims of this action, and once you cannot invent any more victims, you become morally dumbfounded. I am not here to say whether or not the man was morally right or wrong in doing this action, but I am here to say that whatever your reason will inevitably support what your intuition says. An analogy to describe how the mind works is comparing it to the body of a dog. Intuitions are its body, and reasoning is its tail. A dog's tail reacts to what the body feels, not the other way around. No one can forcibly wag a dog's tail to make it happy. The same can be said about the human mind. Intuitions form judgment, and reasoning is an extension of that. In the same way you cannot wag a dog's tail to make it happy, no one can reason his or her way to an intuition. Whenever people reason, they reason to support the beliefs they already held. Whenever someone hears something he wants to believe, he asks himself, can I believe this? And whenever he hears something he doesn't want to believe, he asks himself, must I believe this? To show this, consider a man who supports a new government spending bill. If he hears about how the bill will save Americans millions of dollars, he will likely readily agree with this prediction and use the prediction in his rhetoric. However, if the same man hears about how the bill will cause unemployment to skyrocket, he will come up with reasons, like how the prediction used inaccurate data, to refute the claim. If the dog feels happy, the tail wags. If your intuitions feel something, your reasoning will soon follow. After hearing this, people's first reaction is to disagree. It feels like we are consciously and rationally in control of our actions. However, the unconscious mind impacts you in more ways than you might think. As a society, we hear stories of lying politicians, reckless drivers, bystanders of awful atrocities, and people who make decisions that seem to defy reason. You may think that these people are outliers. You may say that these people are irrational people. However, let me ask you a question. Are you above these mistakes? Most people would say yes. However, nobody is above seemingly pointless actions that defy reason. In Newcastle, England, in an office no different than the thousands of other offices across the world, a beverage station was placed where employees paid for drinks using an honor system. On the door of the station, a piece of paper was hung up outlining the prices of the drinks. One week, without the employees knowing, researcher Melissa Batesman started keeping track of the money dispensed. By only changing one thing, she was able to increase the amount paid by 7 times. How did she do this? She did not add a security camera or even increase the size of the piece of paper. All she did was change the outline of the piece of paper. She changed the normal floral patterns to pairs of eyes. These pairs of eyes increased the amount paid from £1.17 to £8.25. Why did the employees pay 7 times the amount? Well, they thought that they are consciously making the decision to be more honorable in pay. They are subconsciously compelled to be more honest. In fact, Whenever the employees were interviewed about the eyes, no one had even noticed them. A change that no one even noticed increased the amount paid by 700%. Let me ask you again, are you above these mistakes? These people are not an aberration from the norm. These people are not a special case. These people are the same people that are in the thousands of the other offices across the world. These people are not outliers. They are us. If you ever find yourself asking, how did I make such a mistake? Or, what was I thinking? You have felt the impact of the unconscious mind. Or, more specifically, the impact when the unconscious mind makes a mistake. Our morals shape our politics, but what shapes someone's morals? A common debate in modern psychology is the concept of nature versus nurture. Are people born with genetics that promote specific behaviors? Or are people formed by their experiences to see the world in a certain way? As with most psychological debates, the answer is a mixture of both. Our morals are formed in 3 steps. The first step is our genetics. Multiple studies have shown a correlation between genetics and politics. One study showed a correlation between liberalism and the neurotransmitters dopamine, which is associated with openness to experience and pleasure. Another study showed a correlation between politics and the neurotransmitters glutamate and serotonin, which are associated with reactions to threat and fear. While the correlation between genetics and politics is a small one, it is a starting point for our morals to form. The second step of our morals forming is our childhood. Some children are more sensitive to threats, and others seek novelty more. These broad personality traits correlate with specific behaviors, like being more obedient or being more rebellious. These behaviors will change how the kid sees the world as he or she grows up. For example, a more rebellious kid will likely learn to resent authority, while an obedient kid will learn to respect it. One study showed that kids who had become liberals were more self-reliant, more curious, and more verbal, but also more aggressive, less neat, and more disobedient. The third step of our morals forming is our life story. People are storytellers. We like to tell stories about how we care about our opinions. The perfect example of a life story is the lead guitarist of the Rolling Stones, Keith Richards. Keith was a reasonably well-behaved kid in his school's choir. The choir was winning competitions, and he had to skip classes in order to attend the competitions. However, once he hit puberty, his voice deepened, and he was cut from the choir. After being cut, he then found out that he had to redo an entire year of school due to the classes that he missed. Keith described it as a kick in the guts. It ignited a fire in him that made him resent authority and everything that it stood for. People don't just join a political side. They are formed by their experiences to see the world in a certain way, and therefore want to improve it in a certain way. Western society has been worshiping reason and condemning passions for a millennium. In the Republic, Plato proclaims, "So is it not appropriate that the rational element rule, since it is wise and exercises forethought on behalf of the entire soul, while the spirited part should be subordinate and fight by its side." In Plato's ideal world, people's spirited part would always be subservient to reason. This appears to make sense. If people reasoned instead of listening to their passions, people would be able to make more rational decisions. While rationality is something to strive for, leaving our passions behind to just reason in and of itself is not a way that the human brain was made to work. Consider a person whose rationality is in charge of their minds. Every single decision he or she makes stems from rational thinking, and every decision is a conscious decision. This person would be Plato's ideal man. This type of person does exist. Someone who lacks emotion and makes every decision based on reason is called a psychopath. Psychopaths reason but don't feel. We reason to support our moral intuitions, not to create a moral compass. That is why reasoning without passions is so dangerous. Brain damage can cause similar results. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio studied patients who had suffered damage to their brain's ventromedial prefrontal cortex. These patients' ability to have reason became almost non-existent. These patients' ability to have emotion became almost non-existent. However, they kept the same IQ, still knew the difference between right and wrong, and still scored well on moral reasoning tests. However, their lives fell apart. Why is that? Imagine you are shopping for a refrigerator. You go into research without any bias towards any specific model, and all you have to make the decisions are the pros and cons of each option. Your brain has to juggle the strengths and weaknesses of each model, and once the options exceed a couple, remembering everything can become an incredibly strenuous task, or even impossible. For these patients, every single decision that they make in their lives is like deciding between 10 different models of refrigerator. These findings were as anti-Platonic as they could have been. Reasoning requires passions, and reasoning by itself is not enough to live a good life. Someone may argue that the root of the problem is how people surround themselves that agree with them politically, and how people watch news stations that agree with them politically. While this is true and an element of the problem, it is not the root of the problem. In 2018, sociologist Christopher A. Bale studied how exposure to opposing views on Twitter affected political polarization. Bale paid participants to follow a bot that retweeted posts from people on the opposite end of the political spectrum. For example, conservatives followed a bot that followed people like Hillary Clinton, and liberals followed a bot that followed a bot that reposted tweets from people like Donald Trump. What he found was the opposite of what you would expect. He found that the liberals who had followed the conservative bot became marginally more liberal, but the conservatives who had followed the liberal bot became noticeably more conservative. Our reasoning serves our passions, and even when people are exposed to opposing views, our judgment still does not change. Bale emphasized that these findings should not suggest that exposure to opposing views increases polarization in all settings, as most of America doesn't even use Twitter, but still does show that exposure to opposing views does not guarantee that someone becomes less polarized. Someone may ask how people change their mind at all if they always listen to their intuitions. Whenever someone's minds change, their intuition has to change first. Whenever you are trying to convince someone of something, you have to appeal to their intuitions before you can convince the entire person. This is why pathos arguments are so effective. Pathos arguments are arguments that appeal to emotions, and emotions are closely linked with our intuitions. This is why charitable organizations start ads with a hook to get the viewer in, and then talk about money later. If people were perfectly rational, then the order in which information was presented would not matter. The ASPCA starts advertisements with a sad-looking puppy and then asks viewers to donate $20 a month. Advertisement agencies know that they have to convince someone's emotions before they can convince the entire person. Whenever someone's intuitions change, their reasoning and judgment will soon follow. The core of my argument is hard to believe for some. It feels like reasoning is and ought to be in control of the human mind. However, human beings are imperfect, and so is the process of reasoning that goes on in our minds. If human beings were perfect, then all that has been said would be untrue. However, we are imperfect, and so is our reason. Ultimately, whenever you find yourself in a heated political argument or watching a debate, remember how nobody is a perfectly rational person. Your opponent isn't perfect, and neither are you. In Colossians, Paul tells us, "Let your speech always be gracious." You don't have to agree with them, but just remember that you both are imperfect beings trying to make the world a better place, even if your definition of better is different. Thank you. I would now like to take questions from the judges.
That was beautifully nerdy and brilliant, and I loved it. I read a lot of epistemology, which is the philosophy of knowledge, and I don't know. I'm just gratified that someone else with the same amazing name is into this. You very powerfully showed intuition can't be trusted alone. Mm-hmm. You also showed that Plato is wrong. We don't want to be entirely driven by reason, or we all become sociopaths. What's the foundation? Or what am I supposed to do now?
I believe that we should trust our morals and like the morals that God put in us that gave us the intuition to follow specific rights and wrongs. Okay. That's what we should follow because that's what inevitably supports our reasoning. And the point of the illusion was not to show that, our intuition's always wrong. It was to show that even though we can reasonably say like, those two tables, they're definitely different. Our reasoning can sometimes just be wrong, and it's just our unconscious mind impacting us. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent job, Charlie.
Thank you.
I'm thinking also about implications of your talk, and so like, I think about sermons, I think about debates. Mm-hmm. It seems like the whole goal of a preacher should be more than trying to appeal to people's reason, to appeal to their intuitions and to affect their hearts more than even their minds. And likewise with debates, it seems like, appealing to their sympathies would win a lot more than appealing to their rationality. I'm just curious your thoughts on both those things.
Yes, so I think that's very evident through like if you watch a political debate, it's all about screaming at each other and like making like hating the opponent, and it's all about having that filled emotion and having those gotcha moments where see like this guy is wrong, like he believes in this thing that's terrible. So I think that those type of things really, it shows how people who are trying to convince something of people, like whether it's a politician or like an advertisement agencies, know that while people are to an extent rational, like we can still appeal to rationality to an extent, we are inherently beings who are emotional. So, yeah.
I guess the other question I have is like the chart about the politics. I wonder what would have happened if we would have gotten conservatives listening to conservative politicians or liberals listen to liberal conversations. It seems like it might have the opposite effect. I'm just curious what you think.
Yes. Could we say that one more time? Sorry.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so you're pulling it up. So, if you're conservative and you listen to liberals, you become turned off. And liberals get turned off by listening to conservatives because they're already bought into a certain perspective.
Yes.
But I think if they listen to their own people, they might be like reversed.
I think if people listened, like Republicans are surrounded with other Republicans, I don't think they would become collectively more liberal. I don't think that would happen. I think it does show that inherently, like, whenever we hear something in the opposing view, our first reaction is, I have to refute that, I have to disagree. Like, even if you are exposed to, like, opposing views, like, on YouTube or something, your first reaction is to, how can I prove that wrong? That's why I feel like, inherently, polarization can be decreased by surrounding yourselves and becoming friends with people with the opposing view. I think Allie mentioned that on her thesis, how people who were like friends and became friends with people on the opposite side, they tended to see the other side as more, as not as bad as they once thought. And I believe that is because our intuitions are also linked with like people that we know and we trust. Like if you become friends with someone on the opposite side, you will likely learn to, okay, so not all of them are crazy, and like, okay, so I see where they're coming from. So I think that is how political polarization can be decreased. So,
yeah, I appreciate that. And I think it seems to have pretty profound impact on apologetics and outreach too. But yeah, thank you. Great job.
Thank you.
Charlie, I don't really know what to ask you. But here's what I keep thinking about intuition and reasoning. And this is where, at first I was going to make a joke and say, well, I'm not as big of a nerd as Mr. Mooney. But when I think about what I'm about to say, I think maybe I am. I just keep thinking about literature and intuition and reason. And in the 10th grade, we studied the literature of the Romantics, who thought intuition weighed more heavily than the reasoning of the neoclassicists. and we can see that in the literature that we read and the artwork that we look at. And I still don't know what kind of question to ask you, but I do think there's a balance there that you talk about. And I guess the only question I have is I still don't get that piece of paper on that table. Like my mind, even when you show it to me, I can't make it make sense. Make it make sense, Charlie. That's my question.
I think the reason I have it in here is because it is such like striking, like it doesn't look like, it does not make sense at all, but they are the same size and shape and everything. So yeah.
You did a great job.
Thank you.
Charlie, I feel like I'm watching an episode of Brain Games. It's what you describe as intuition, is that the same thing as a conscience?
I think they are comparable, but they're not the same thing. I think intuitions are more like that, like the automatic thought that comes to your mind after hearing something, or it's like your thought. I talked about the inclination whether or not to like someone. Like if you don't really like someone, whatever comes out of their mouth, you're like, oh, I don't like that. And I think conscience can be a form of intuition. Like, man, I really shouldn't be doing this, or I should do this thing. But I don't think they're the exact same thing. So.
The only other thing I'm kind of struck by is this can seem, I don't think that's what you're saying, can seem kind of fatalistic, like if my genetics goes into my morals formation, my childhood, my life story, like I just am what I am and I can't change it. Are there some things that we can do practically, or should we do to help form our hearts, our intuition? What are the things that we have control over that we can do?
That is definitely something that even I struggled with as I was researching, like, are we even in control of ourselves? But I feel like there's two things. One, it's like, even if your intuition is still you, like I would say like Keith Richards, the story of the guy who was cut from the choir, I think even if someone told him, hey, your intuitions are the reason that you resent authority, I think he would still be like, well, yeah, I don't, like I think he would still.
Because that's a reasonable thing to say,
it's
right?
Like when you go through experiences. I think you solve this by knowing this element about humanity and then going to things like I addressed in my conclusion, like just recognizing that you're not perfectly rational and neither is your opponent, and trying to genuinely see from the opposing side and just try to maybe become friends with them, or just try to understand, because once you understand, that's how you can potentially change your opinion over time.
I mean, this is the thing that pops into my mind is like, it's why at a funeral people can say reasonable things to you about what the reality is, but that's not what you need at that time. You need to just hear like how you feel and your heart kind of thing.
For sure.
And Mr. Davis kind of referred to this, but I'd like to ask you, what are the implications of this for like outreach and evangelism for the church?
Yeah. So I feel like for topics like religion, some people are definitely very intellectual people. Like if you're very like if someone's an atheist and like known atheist and they're like or like a redder, then I feel like appealing to their reason, because they're used to that scenario where like, I'm going to debate someone. Mm-hmm. But I feel like for most people, it is just appealing to their intuition of, we kind of talked about it in Making Sense of God. Like we have an innate intuition and like we want to praise a God, we want to worship a God. And even if we don't believe in God, we always worship something. Like that is something that's innate inside us. And I think recognizing that and appealing to that would be how we can appeal to agnostics or atheists. So,
thanks, Charlie.
Thank you. Awesome. If there's no further questions, thank you.